Hey everybody, I'm Gary from landownerremovalqueensland.com.au 0449 986 880, and this video you're about to watch is about breaking the back of Moreton Bay Regional Council corruption and the TMR corruption, biosecurity corruption and the Premier's corruption. So it's important for you to watch these videos right through to the end. There's an enormous amount of information there, and on a local level it's there to help you cement your rights and to get protection as you should have been protected from the environmental disasters created by the corruption between these organisations. It has taken me about 4 years to get to this point, and I've documented a great deal of information there, and I owe all of this to all of the supporters through Facebook and YouTube who've shared my videos extensively and spread the information, held politicians accountable by sending them the information all the time, every time I post something. It's because of you guys that I've been able to break their corruption. I've gone to the CCC and highlighted the people individually, specifically, that have been lying, knowingly lying as a result of the corruption. It is interesting from insider departments that they actually state that they don't believe corruption actually is the right terminology for failing to take action to enforce the Biosecurity Act and failing to meet their legal obligations by law. But you know, that is for the courts to decide against specific public servants and bureaucrats, and against the politicians that set this process in place, and to ask the questions of the mainstream media why they never took action when this level of corruption had been brought to their attention many times over, where individual departments responsible for managing lands under their jurisdiction, under their control, had allowed the money to be circumvented and removed from those operations, and why the politicians that acknowledged, like the Premier, acknowledged that she was aware that the councils had been misleading the public for decades, and specifically in recent times with this new risk assessment based weeds program that they're trying to illegally get up. Once again, that goes against and breaches the Biosecurity Act, and yet they're allowing these entities to put these things up in place. So we're going to have to deal with many sections of government and individuals who have knowingly misled the public to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars worth of damage. So these are aggravated offences on the scale that Australia's never seen before. So please watch the videos right through to the end. Take as much information as you can from those videos. Understand that we run consultation operations for people seeking compensation from the government. They're not free, but it is, nobody in the world has my level of experience or knowledge on the costs and the effects of these materials flowing across your lands. So from a point of view of you undertake operations to clean up those materials on your land, then you should be able to seek rightfully damages from the TMR, from main roads, from local authorities like Moreton Bay Regional Council, Brisbane City Council. In fact, every single council from the top of the Daintree, or the Daintree, all the way to the Victorian border have been operating illegally. And the Premier and the Prime Ministers are known about this, as well as the agricultural ministers. So once again, landownerremovalqueensland.com.au 0449 986 880. Hopefully some of the media organisations will decide to preempt the situation, since I took documentation to the CCC to move this forward against the Premier and against the Minister, Mr. Mark Ferner, the Attorney General, the Environment Minister. We need to get to the bottom of why these people failed to act when this information was brought to their attention, and they continued to send that information directly to Mark Ferner instead of taking action against the processes that were corruptly put in place to allow these crimes to happen. We're talking about massive aggravated breaches of the Biosecurity Act and breaches of environmental law, where every one of these entities and these persons had responsibilities to the public. But it goes further with the levels of corruption, because the actual departments responsible for protecting those lands failed to meet their legal obligations, and it wasn't until I contacted the CCC that suddenly TMR has found a reason to start operations on those lands that I specifically identified, which doesn't save the situation for the public that own the lands that those materials expressly dumped onto illegally. You can contact me as I've given my details, and I'll help you to start working through the process. And I advise everybody throughout Australia, please get in touch. Let's start moving these things forward. The level of corruption is staggering, and the amount of money involved in what they should have been doing and have been ripping out of our systems have very severe consequences in the fires that you've already seen over a 3-year period. And that's the problem. We're looking at fires that were only in the beginning of 2020, when the fires were all through 2019, 2018 and started in 2017, resulting in complete destruction of many, many large-scale areas of habitat and environment. So they weren't just in that particular area, but people who have a tendency to want to only talk about the largest of all, and then after that everything else doesn't matter. So anyway, we need to force the Royal Commission to actually consider the proper findings and the proper information, and understand how this level of corruption was implemented against our nation, and then also to follow that through to its end result, with people being charged for those crimes. Now, look at the amount of cost that these materials, that's all of my work put forward. Now we understand the cost per acre and the cost of these things, because we don't have government officials who can be trusted to go through these things and properly identify the worst areas and then deal with them. So please support this even more, because we've finally broken the back of the corruption, and we can actually push this forward to protect these areas, protect the animals that we've already lost. In those areas, we have to deal with the consequence of those losses, and then start to deal with the amount of areas being destroyed even today. So again, I'm Gary, 0449 986 880, landownerremovalqueensland.com.au. You can find me on Facebook. You can join our group page and share information and find out the latest wins that we've had in bringing this forward, and understand that it was the people that were supporting me and circulating this information that have had the greatest impacts on environmental protection in Australia's history. And that's been my 4-year works, and the only person that's been working towards that end goal. Everybody else in animal welfare has been working the opposite. But we'll deal with those particular issues as this goes on into the future, and you can expect a great deal of videos specifically naming the names and showing how they were circumventing the law, and how long these materials have been growing in these places, and the costs involved, which should make the seeking of compensation a much easier process into the future, given that I've done all the hard work of the math and the expansion rates of the materials. So Gary, Lantana Removal Queensland, 0449 986 880. Talk to you soon. We operate out in Narangba, Queensland, but we go anywhere, and the processes are the same throughout the nation. So this is nationwide, and all councils have been circumventing that law. I can prove their collusion between those other departments and the breaches of the environmental law and Biosecurity Act. So we need to take action before the next lot of fires come. Catch you soon. Bye-bye. Well, hello everybody. I'm Gary from Lantana Removal Queensland. Just wanted to bring you out to the real world and show you the same things I've shown you for a great many years now, and led the way in the war on the lantana that the government illegally grew through all of these areas. And as we have a look at how this expanded over the last 3 years, where it was just a narrow band along those areas. Now it's all the way from the roadside to the fence line. Now, there's nothing lives in this material or under this material. There's nowhere where you'll find animal tracks moving through this stuff. And this is even on roadsides where they've got to cross the road and hit the other side. So the only place they can do that is through the driveways of people, or come darting out where there's a watercourse like this runs down through. Now, one of the biggest reasons why I'm doing this for you guys, this is where they've poisoned this material. So they've followed some of what I've been saying for a long time about the potency of the material that grows right at the end of the watercourse as it drains the road. The big problem is they create such a massive fire problem with those materials because they're tinder dry. But see, poisons don't work on this material. You can see the material already starting to reshoot, and everywhere that it's poisoned and it reshoots like that, it then passes on the resistance to the next genetic breed, and it just continues to evolve. This is why poisons have never been successful on this material. Plus, you can't get access. You look at that, that's a sea of material, where this was only a band along the road and a band along the fence line, and look at it today, 12 months later. But because I've taken it to the Moreton Bay Regional Council in no uncertain terms, and then taken them to the CCC, suddenly we have action happening up the other end towards Petrie, where you'll find they're just butchering it as usual with mulching heads, and that helps to spread and seed it even further. But you know, any action's better than no action, because in its full state, when it's like this being flushed under the roads, you'll find there's a drainage ditch here which will flush out on that side over there, and that material's all there because of that. So you can see how the watercourse runs down through there, the strength of the materials. This is one of the other fallacies that they misled the public with. They said, oh no, it doesn't like salty conditions and it doesn't like water, yet I can show you where it's living in swamps and with its feet in the water. So it's all a load of rubbish. But that's the problem. The lack of knowledge within these organisations is staggering, and that's what's costing us hundreds of billions of dollars per year. And the relationships between these not-for-profit organisations and now these major contractors, who you'll find will most likely be ex-government employees, the same as the not-for-profit organisations were. So the level of corruption for the CCC is absolutely staggering. They have to investigate who owned all these organisations and what their relationships were to the Premier, the Prime Minister and the government departments that did nothing about these materials. I actually have contacts within the departments like DNRME and things like that, where they actually state that they don't believe this is corruption just because the entities failed to take any action and meet their legal obligations, or the fact that the entities that were responsible for policing these things never took any actions. And now the Premier says that that's actually the councils. And the councils have started a new wave of evasion now, which is called risk assessment based weeds programs. And if ever they get to go down that path in any shape or form, the amount of these calamities and the costs of the fires are going to go through the roof. But same as the mulching of this material with these entities who don't have eradication experience, they just are mulching the materials. It spreads it, it makes it worse, it opens up the ground for the seeds even worse, and the whole process just gets worse and worse. But in the interim, it actually, you know, looks like something's been done, and at least this material's not sitting on the side of the road, but it doesn't actually do any long-term solutions. And we've got to get away from this garbage of the government departments and their sneaky deals with these companies. Or I've seen things where I'm very positive that the actual people in these departments actually have interests in the companies that have got the contracts for these things, especially contracts like this that no work had been done in the 4 years, and then suddenly, because I've actually gone to the CCC and people are looking like they're going to go to jail over these materials, hundreds of billions of dollars worth of these materials being released into the environment. So suddenly they have a company running along the side of Debra Road, which brings me to the situation that as an open offer to people, I will help you to seek compensation from TMR and from Moreton Bay Regional Council for the materials that have been deposited on your lands. So by all means get in contact with me, Lantana Removal Queensland .com.au 0449 986 880 Gary, and we can talk about your issues. I can film the materials that have been deposited on your lands, and we can talk about working out the equations for compensation. Now, my services as a consultant aren't free, but in the big picture, given that I've been working on this for 4 years and finally I've broken Moreton Bay Regional Council's back, it's time that you decided to defend your property and also get some money back from the people who have been operating illegally for so long, and the corruption that existed between Moreton Bay Regional Council and TMR and National Parks and Water Board, and the list goes on. Every single state government entity. We have written letters from the Premier stating that she was aware that this corruption was going on and that these people had been lying to the general public. So the CCC really needs to investigate that level of corruption from the Premier as soon as it's in writing, and actually take action against the Premier and against the Minister, Mark Furner, who has been dodging this for the last 3 to 4 years. The Attorney General, who had it brought to her attention. So it's a very serious crime and corruption matter, with the total being hundreds of billions of dollars. So at the end of the day, we absolutely need to prosecute those people, and also the Prime Minister, because the Prime Minister has known about this all the way back in Turnbull days, and he's allowed this to happen, and then he runs a fake Royal Commission which says it's not interested in the facts, it's only interested in feel-good ideas to stop the fires in the future maybe. Well, it's time that we stopped allowing these politicians to run fake cover-ups and actually deal with people who are interested in uncovering these materials and the people who allowed them to grow there, and prosecute those materials and people for those materials being there. Because the ecological disaster that's flown across millions of hectares of land on private land as a result of the criminal activities of all of these entities could not have succeeded without the Premier's knowledge. And in actual fact, in writing, the Premier says that she's aware that the councils were misleading the public and lying to the public. So the question then is, why did she allow that to happen? I know it saves her hundreds of millions of dollars in meeting her legal obligations, but really the question is, all of these entities that were responsible for land management allowed the Premier to steal the money from those areas, okay? Allowed the party to steal the money from those areas. And that's the real question about this, is how was this perpetrated, and how could somebody say that they don't believe it's corruption when it goes through each department? We not only had departments who were responsible for these lands who failed, and then councils who were responsible for the inspection and knowledge of this. Now, it's proven that the council has no knowledge in lantana. It's been proven that they have no knowledge in the spread of lantana, the costs and all of those issues, until I brought it to their attention and the CCC's attention. So then why would we be paying these people to carry out works that are only going to spread the material? They're going to cost us a fortune. They're unsuccessful in the big picture. All they do is make it look like something's happened, okay? And the process just keeps repeating itself because the corruption of the people in power continue to exist. Now, just so you understand this, we have departments like the Department of Natural Resources, Mines and Energy, and the Environment Department, who were responsible for protection of the environment. Now, that source inside of the government says that they don't believe it's corruption when the safety guards, the police of the environment, were supposed to have been able to understand the costs of these materials, the devastation they caused to the environment. Now, they were working with a mob who's one of the worst criminal entities in Australian history and environment, and that is the Landcare. Landcare staff have been lying to the public for decades about lantana, because 85% of the lantana grows on Crown lands. So it was a case that these people needed to corruptly mislead the public, and the head of Landcare moved over to be the chief biosecurity environmental officer. So if that isn't a joke, I don't know what is. And in 2 years that I've been writing to them, he has never once said that he has the overall power over the entire process. Why didn't he take any action? If Landcare knew anything about the legal requirements of the Biosecurity Act, then why did Ian Thompson not take action? Why did Malcolm Letts, the head of Biosecurity Queensland, not take action? In fact, Malcolm Letts tried to mislead me in 2018 at the Roundtable Biosecurity Conference, where Ian Thompson was touted to the public as taking that position. Malcolm Letts told me that there was no money for lantana. Lantana was a dead subject. That's interesting for a person who's had 40 years in that system of vegetation to make such a misleading statement. The Biosecurity Act is very clear about the legal requirements of cleaning up lantana, yet some people got together and decided to circumvent both environmental law and Biosecurity Act and biosecurity law. Now, why did the Premier know this was happening and then not take action 2 years ago? You know, she's admitted she knew these people were doing that, but it saved her money that she would have had to have stopped taking out of these entities. But I started a couple of times to go down the path of something that's very important to you to understand. We have a very simple safeguard within our system of governance that's supposed to stop this from being able to happen. And I'm not sure whether any of you actually really know what that safeguard is. It's very simple, it's very cheap, it's very cost effective, and it failed completely. The safeguard is called the opposition party. Now, the opposition party in both federal government and state government had this information brought to them about the premiers, about the prime ministers. Now, you would think a party that is dedicated to being the policeman of this would have gone, oh my gosh, these people have been doing things illegally. They've been doing completely dishonest things. And you know what? If we do go after them, then not only will we be seen as heroes in the environment and be seen that we are actually looking after places, we will be meeting our legal obligations to the people. What happened? Nothing at all. Nothing's ever happened. The Queensland opposition have said, oh well, we'll come out and we'll look at these things with you when it's really close to the election, and we won't have to spend any money on it then, but we can just ride along on your shirt tails and get something out of it. But they're not interested in doing anything about the environment. They knew this was illegal. I've never been a person who has been able to quietly do these things and not speak my mind and not really strongly take it to the people. When you look at how this stuff burns, and this stuff burns like petrol. So in an acre of lantana, you have at the very base level anything from 4,000 cubic meters of this material that's not allowed to be here, that burns like petrol. You look at it ground level down there. You look at all the leaf litter from all of the trees all caught up in that material, and it burns like petrol. I remove this stuff and I burn it straight out of the ground. Within minutes of it being removed, I walk over and I run 3 fires and I put it on the fires and I burn it. and it burns like petrol. So it's hard to explain to people that when this material continues to grow and nothing gets through this material, so it's total collapse of all biodiversity, of all animals. It kills anything that eats it. That includes birds. There's never been a study in Australia done on whether birds survive eating the berries off this material. But in 2018, I was responsible for proving that lantana seeds float and the damage that it does and the costs of that damage. So when we go through, no matter what figure we put on it, if we put on the band-aid figure and say, well, mulching costs this amount per acre and this is what we are facing, but it spreads it and it continues the problem continuing to expand, then that's what we face in the cost-effective side of things, that we've got to start heading towards proper eradication of these materials, which the greatest crime that they ever committed was taking the public out of the system. But see, the public that owned this property here has spent a lot of money down their fence line having to remove materials that have flowed through their fence line because lantana doesn't respect your legal rights to be protected. Moreton Bay Regional Council staff lie to me, lie to you. You don't have my experience, so you don't know how to stand up to them and stand them up. But now we're facing a situation where hopefully a lot of people go to jail over this because their actions, you can see right over the back there how much of that material is being cleared away for the fence line for the farmer to be able to try to protect his lands from the state government. And that's what I offer to people, is we can go and start to take these people to court and start to seek compensation before the fires come. Because just like in all these other areas, when the fires came through these materials and into those trees, this stuff burns like petrol. It gets it into the crowns of the trees and turns every fire into a massive fire. But this material kills the gum trees. We lose billions of trees per year through New South Wales and Queensland. You look at it down there in that basis down there, and you can see how much materials, meters, cubic meters and cubic meters of material stacked up there with leaves all through it, just waiting for the next spark to come along. What'll happen is the council come along and poison this fringe, as they do, and it just sets the perfect wick for these materials to go straight off the roads. You look at the leaf litter all around that material, then imagine when they poison the grass there, then all of a sudden you've got this enormous wick, beautiful dry material under the material, just with a green top on it. And that's what most people mistakenly think. They think, oh, green top on top, it won't burn, and it burns. It burns like you wouldn't believe. It burns incredibly hot. But, you know, that's what we face now. We've exposed these people, so it's because of you guys sharing this information that actually put the weights on these councils and these people to keep me motivated to keep going after them. And I copped a lot of bagging on YouTube and on Facebook saying, oh, you'll never do any good, you'll never beat these people, you know, give up, shut up, go away. But I always knew I would beat them. There's no problems about that, and I've only just started. And they think that by starting some operations through their corruption with groups and entities that they actually have their fingers in those pies, they will be able to circumvent what's coming. But in actual fact, they've actually created a monster now, and they create the next stage of this situation. Until we're actually doing the work, and I'm going through and I'm actually highlighting the most important areas, and we're taking out those areas where it takes the greatest skill, this won't stop. This won't slow down. I've told them many, many times how much it'll cost to undertake those operations, and that's the only time that this will be, you know, less involved, because we'll be more involved in the actual eradication of those materials and training the public on how to deal with those materials on their lands. That's the next part of that. My operations have to be funded by the government to pay back to the communities the monies that they've cost across those border fence lines. And that's what we've got to do now. We've got to take this to the government and demand that they put the money on the table for that, so I can get into the most important areas. Because one of the biggest things is that although this starts today with what's been undertaken there, because I went to the CCC, because I finally found where and how to apply the proper situation, the proper leverage against these criminals, it's the opposition parties who let you down. So don't go voting for those people and thinking something's going to change. Please don't misread into this and go, oh, well, we'll just flog the hell out of the Premier and then that'll make things good because the opposition will do the job then. The opposition were in power while these things were being done. You have a look at the depth of all of that dead material just waiting for the right spark. It's over a foot deep, that material, just waiting for that spark to take off, for somebody to throw a cigarette butt out of the window. And that dead patch along that strip is where they poison every season, and they're about to start poisoning these materials again as they're about to dry off, and then that'll just create the wick, and we'll see massive fires, massive destruction. That's something you've got to understand. National parks for 50 years have been burning this material, and for nearly 100 years it's been known in the worldwide that these materials you cannot burn, because when you burn them in place they actually destroy all of the native vegetation, and then this material comes back even stronger after that's been burnt. So it's even more destructive, and that's been going on for 50 years through national parks, while they knew that that was having that effect. It's just one of those other terrible criminal activities that I fight against, because we must start spending the money correctly and doing the job correctly. So when we actually remove these materials and deal with these issues properly in the right environments, we can save billions of dollars for our government and for our local communities. And that is what has to happen with my work, is I have to be paid what I said to them it would take, and then we go through local communities and we train people on how this material has to come out in the most cost-effective way with the longest results, and bring the public back into the picture, because it's more about you protecting your lands. Then you'll take even more notice of how much criminal activity was going on around you, and you'll be operating much cheaper than what has been allowed to happen right under your nose because your council's lied to you. And this is every single council now. There is no council in Australia now that's going to survive what is about to happen because of this. It just started with the criminals in Moreton Bay Council lying to you on paper and in film. And that's the thing, you can do so much for all the animals that are dying today and are dying in the next lot of fires when the national parks light up their fires again and start killing all the animals. You can hold them accountable and fix that and save enormous parts of our forestry and our lands just by realizing that the fires create massive amounts of climate change pollution, but they destroy the grounds. The thing between dirt and soils is the subsoil life. When you kill the subsoil life with fires, that is the greatest form of destruction within these environments. So you've got to do this properly, and it doesn't have to be horrifically expensive. But when you destroy the property values by allowing these materials to take over the suburbs, as Moreton Bay Regional Council, Brisbane City Council, every single council throughout Queensland, from the Daintree to the Victorian border through New South Wales, every single one of these councils has been operating illegally with the Premier's sanctioning of those crimes. And they've been preparing this new risk assessment-based weeds program to facilitate even worse that crime. But it won't work. It's already collapsed now with what the work is that's being done here. And that's how you can help. Share all the information, discuss it with your friends, get us out to be able to film your lands where these materials are. It doesn't have to be in Brisbane, it doesn't have to be around the north side of Brisbane. It can be anywhere in Queensland. You're just paying for the costs and the consultation process and the defence process of protecting your properties. But in these particular instances, when you have many millions of dollars over small areas flowing across your lands every year, you need to start taking it seriously so that you protect not only your lands, your community's lands, and you hold the councils accountable, because they're ripping this money out of there. It is legally responsible for them to have spent the money on these things. So where did the money go? Where did the state government steal the money, and where did it go? It's by law is their legal responsibility through the court system. We need to be having meetings on this at a community level before the fires come back, and start to deal with the corruption that the Premier is responsible for of Queensland and New South Wales, and all premiers. None of them are doing any different than this. And it makes coronavirus and the costs of coronavirus look like nothing when you start doing the math on these materials. And before me, there was no math being done. There was no expansion understanding of these materials. I have no equal in the world within this subject. And it's time that we started to sit down and discuss how much material is flowing through your lands, the amount of material behind it, the fall of those things, and understand what sort of levels those government entities have put across your lands and how it will affect you into the future. Because many of you, it's not just a simple process of the first cleanup. These people have done damage to you for 4 years, 5 years, 10 years. So we have to start putting these things through the court before the fires. The fires are total decimation of the entire ecosystems, complete forestry lost. And that's what they have gotten away with. So please join me in this. Please help share this, and please take a lot of that for yourselves and understand it's because people kept supporting me and kept passing that information around to the politicians, passing it around to all of these entities, that they helped to keep the fuel going in me, to keep bashing my head against the wall to get this to happen. And we have won. This is the beginning of the next phase in our protecting our homes and our children. You have to look at how these people committed their crimes to understand exactly what those costs were in the state government departments that have not been there doing their jobs for decades. Misleading the public, shutting the public down, stopping them from taking action, all to protect the premiers and prime ministers while these crimes were being committed. It's right in front of you, and I'm happy to explain it to anybody. Call me. Let's sit down and talk about these things. Let's have public meetings before the fires come back. Let's understand why the fire brigade never brought this to your attention. When this material reaches stage 3, it can be 50,000 cubic meters per acre, okay, of material, of highly flammable material that burns like petrol, that is illegal for it to be there. Why didn't the fire brigade tell you that before the fires came? Why aren't they telling you that today? It's very simple, because they are a state government department. They are beholding to the state government. It's not a democracy. They're not allowed to tell you the truth. Remember the police officer who filmed his comrades beating handcuffed people in the station, and he went to jail. This is not a democracy. Palaszczuk put that in place. That was voted in by our government, that whistleblowers can no longer expose the state government to the Crime and Corruption Authority. That's why people say to me, oh, you've got all the answers, you should run for politics. If you join these scumbags in that system, you can't achieve anything. The only reason I can do what I can do is because I'm outside of that system. I don't answer to these people. You know, they'd have me in jail for telling you the truth about how this material burns. But you look at this material. That material is over 10 feet tall. That's about, that material, a tip would be 20 feet tall. Just growing right under your nose on the side of the road illegally. And it's been there for 20 years. In fact, I can prove the corruption between the council and the state government in Moreton Bay Regional Council and the state government department of TMR for 12 years. I can prove that corruption, and I can prove that they have been turning a blind eye to this for over 12 years. And that's the big thing for the Premier. You need to understand that when the fires go through, I now can prove what materials were on those lands, those areas before the fires went through. So you want to understand, when we start having children killed, you are going to be held accountable, and so will you, Morrison. When you actually are held accountable by a royal commission that actually is interested in the facts, you're going to find a lot of this has a very different outcome, because we can now go through and we can actually show the physical film evidence of those materials before that process went through. So that's why suddenly Moreton Bay Regional Council suddenly found the reason to go to TMR and to organise for these materials to be some stuff to be done on them, work to be done on them. So that whole process started because of my work. It's the only reason it ever happened is because then I was threatening them with jail. I was actually specifically naming people within the council who had lied to me last May. Just down the road here, just down at Rush Creek, they held a meeting there, 3 of the heavyweights, and they lied to me. They lied to me about the legal responsibility of council. Now they have a new mayor in there and a new council. They are suddenly thinking about what the legal ramifications are, and that will be only the compensation that people seek as a result of the damage done to their lands, to their family's life, to the health and welfare of their family, to the health and welfare of their local communities. And you're responsible for that, people, because you supported me. A lot of you supported me. A lot of you left my videos up. Other local pages removed my videos and removed my posts because some of the public felt like they were being illegal and illegally responsible, instead of understanding the government will turn. When the fires go through these next lot of fires and they're killing people, and we see death tolls in children and their families, the government will turn 180 degrees and turn on you immediately and overnight, and they will drop it on you so they're seen to be doing something. It's only because of my work that they're actually doing something on their lands, because they know they can't hide from me now. But they will punish you. They will punish you more than anything else, because you allowed these materials to come off these lands and through your lands. And I am the only thing between you and them prosecuting you for not taking action. And if you think you're safe because you say, well, I've got no money, I can't afford it, under Section 263 of the Biosecurity Act, the courts already acknowledged that the councils who were supposed to come in and deal with these issues will come onto your lands. If you fail to comply with the directives you're given of the breach notices by the Biosecurity Act, then they will come onto your lands. They will either use their workers or contractors. They will perform the works and they will bill you for that works. And if you do not pay that bill, they will then go to the courts, and the courts will uphold that, and that money will be put onto your rates of your property. So when you backtrack that, you say, well, how did TMR allow these materials to flow across your lands for the last 12 years with the support of Moreton Bay Regional Council, Brisbane City Council, all of the councils? How did they do that if it wasn't a conspiracy to defraud the government and defraud the people of Australia? Well, it was because the Premier, as she said, she knew they were misleading the public. They had very low risk and low risk. So at the end of the day, that's what I've been fighting for 4 years now, to bring that to your attention. So let's leave it there. I'm Gary from Lantana Removal Queensland, 0449 986 880. And the only way I'm going to start to slow this stuff down to deal with these materials is when they actually put the money on the table. And I'm actually running the organisation to be removing these materials from the highest value targets and areas, which is something the government doesn't understand at all. So instead of allowing contract companies that are already owned by state government workers and entities that are connected to those organisations, which then cost us a fortune and never get proper results and never target the highest importance, highest value targets to get the most bang for our buck. Until that happens, these entities like TMR, National Parks, every single council in Australia are going to end up paying very dearly for this. And that will end up being the ministers as well. And just remember what I said. The opposition parties were your safeguard. You look this up. They were your safeguard, supposed to protect your interests. When they found that the government was doing the wrong thing and operating illegally, they were supposed to take action. The same thing happens with the state-owned media. The media has had this story. I've been sending this story to the media as well as to the premiers, prime ministers and the ministers every single time. Now you would think the media would go, holy hell, you can prove the corruption between the council? You can prove that Moreton Bay Regional Council didn't take action against these entities for 12 years? You can prove that. You can prove it for every single council. Then why didn't the media take up those stories, including ABC? Why didn't they? They've been offered these stories continuously. The proof, the trail, the documentation, and not one of them has ever taken up this story. They did the story on the illegal dumping of the of Jackie Trad's material, but they didn't take up this story of the lantana and the devastation at hundreds of billions of dollars across our states of Queensland and New South Wales. That's what we're fighting. But because you shared all of this information, you talked about this information, no animals live under this stuff. No animals live in this stuff. It's total biodiversity collapse. And yet the UN mislead everybody in the world, saying that the actual greatest threat to biodiversity is land clearing. And yet they know for a fact this material spreads at 12 to 15 times the actual levels of those materials. 12 to 15 times per year, but it doesn't increase at the same rate. It increases much faster. So next year it's 15 to 20 times, and it just keeps through 60 countries around the world. And yet they mislead the public with the WWF and with the RSPCA and with the state government and with Landcare. They all lie to the public. They continuously have said this material is too expensive to clean up. But when I did the math and showed you the math, the costs of leaving one single acre of lantana, which would have cost you $5,000 to deal with, cost you $2 million at the end of the first year. That's the lack of knowledge in our state government and in our councils. Or else it's the level of corruption, isn't it? But anyway, I'll leave it there. Thanks for joining me. Please share it everywhere you possibly can, as hard and as much, and discuss it and have your own comments. And please, let's discuss how the animals go with this material. I've got 40 years plus of eradication of this material. And I can tell you, when I remove this, there's nothing under this material. Nothing at all. And it burns like petrol, and it's complete devastation. And it kills the gum trees, and they knew it killed the gum trees for 30 years. Then how did Malcolm Letts, the head of biosecurity, state that it was a dead subject, there was no money for it, and it was finished with? How could this be naturalised when it has no enemies in the country except me? How could it possibly have been turned its back on when the Biosecurity Act actually forbade it? He was the head of biosecurity. That should have been #1. And yet every single council knew that. The level of corruption that I can prove for every one of these entities, the agricultural ministers, the ministers responsible for the environment, these people have to be held accountable, and we have to deal with what they were doing and what they knew they were doing all the way through. Because the costs that it has cost our nation already are so catastrophic. So I'll wait to talk to you. Gary, lantanaremovalqueensland.com.au, 0449 986 880. Let's talk. Bye-bye.